Mikheil Saakashvili, former president of Georgia.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm incredibly thrilled to be here. What is my first public appearance beyond the audience of Just University, Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, where I happen to teach from time to time. Jamestown is the right place to do this, primarily because I think you really understand well the issues you are talking about now. That's because these are the issues about which you can talk at this, which almost nobody understands in this country, as well as internationally. It's a pity because we are talking about a very important region. We are talking about a region that's basically is close to major changes, either to worse or to better. I hope for the better. And the world shouldn't be taken aback and surprised by what might happen in something what was for terror is still terra incognita for that. It is very important when we talk about Georgian experience. What really mattered in Georgia is that for the first time in many centuries, Georgia created precedent that we created a modern state in where it wasn't meant to be, the Caucasus. Georgia was arguably the first really modern functioning state in what was the CIS sphere. I'm not talking about Baltic countries, they're from different background and history, but among the other 12, this was the first one, and that was, again, was not meant to be. The problems we had in Russia, with Russia, was not because of some people want to simplify it, said hot-headed, impetuous, crazy Saakashvili provoked Russian bear, basically poked it in the eye, and bear woke up and wanted to kill. The problem was that it was not meant to be what Georgia achieved. It wasn't meant to be an attractive model. The problem Russia was facing, I saw it firsthand when I started to meet in the streets, in cafes, and I walked a lot when I was president in Georgia in the streets, and like people, mass visitors from Northern Caucasus, from Chechnya, Dagestan, Kabardok, other places in Northern Caucasus. And the people were saying, well, we came here just to see another kind of country where nobody would stop them at every corner and search them, country where you didn't really need ID to move around, country where nobody asked for bribes, country where people were nice at them and didn't regard them automatically as a suspect. And that's a country that looked like a modern organized place. And they are coming from the background which is very similar to where we were 10, 15 years ago. So they say, if Georgia can make it, then we can make it. That's the principal thing that emerged in my country. Georgia, as we know, was number 8 on World Bank Index of Doing Business, first developing country ever to enter top 10. Vladimir Putin made a big fuss about Russia making a big success to number 92. Again, we are number 8. European Union, but it's not only with Russia we are competing. Georgia was less corrupt than Germany, Denmark, Norway, according to European Union study, less crime than Iceland, safest country in Europe, again, based on European Union studies consistently for 4 years. So everything that nobody could imagine. Because the approach towards Caucasus was very simple. You just have to let them do the things. They'll fight with each other. They will, undermine each other. They will spy on each other. They will all come to us, to our colonial masters, and try to use us against each other. So they are very easy to manipulate, to operate, to play around with. Only Russia can understand mysterious soul of the Caucasus. And that's how I remember articles back in the 90s in the US, and the spirit is still there. Leave them alone. Only Russians know how to deal with those guys. And the reality is that it's much more complex, and I think Georgia has changed it. And the reason, I think what it also brings is, what Georgia brings besides modern infrastructure and modern developments, it also brings, and security, it also brings the idea of democracy. Georgia had alteration of power. And not only once, by the way, once it was noted, twice, because I resigned from presidency in 2007 after street rallies. And I told, okay, there are mass rallies, now I need another round of legitimacy and shorten my presidential term. People forget it, that I did resign and I offered people another chance to think it over whether they wanted continuation of presidency. And again, there was a period of cohabitation and also what looked very smooth transfer of power in Georgia. So from that standpoint, there are many precedents that my country creates, and I think the very important precedent we have to create is that Caucasus should become a big zone of freedom, prosperity, and democracy. In 2011, I made this first speech about it at the UN, and then after that we started all the programs with you of education, of bringing out people, of extending visa-free travel first to the regions of Northern Caucasus, and then later to the rest of Russia. Hundreds of thousands of people came over, and I strongly believe that Tbilisi is the center of the Caucasus. The focal point of gathering for North and South Caucasus is a place of dialogue of culture, place of access for our Northern Caucasian brothers and sisters to the outside civilization of Europe, because Georgia is going to make it to the European structures and to eventually to NATO. And this is all offering chances to people who live on the other side of the ridge. And so from that standpoint, I think there is lots of things still to accomplish. We were at the very beginning of this route. We had this television peak specially created to handle those issues, to get into this, get into households of every North Caucasians and talk to them not in a propaganda manner, but basically introduce our country from all sides. And indeed, television peak was very critical also of the Georgian government. But that was also beauty of it, because not just having to watch just propaganda saying, oh, how great Georgia is. No, that Georgia has also internal problems, criticism with everything. Journalists were free to express themselves, and that made broadcast quality. Unfortunately, television had been closed after 2012 elections, but I think it did important task for the several years before it existed. And then, of course, education programs are still being carried on. Now, what is going to happen in our region? We are approaching really big changes. People think, oh, everything is fixed already. Vladimir Putin is going to be forever. Russian public is so passive, they are resigned to it. Nothing is going to happen, and things will stay and get worse and worse and worse. He's going to take revenge after Olympics. We should be scared of the end of Olympics. Things are really going to be bad. Well, I heard the same things about Ukraine a few months ago. I had lots of good friends in Ukraine. I feel myself partly Ukrainian, and lots of my friends were telling Ukraine is finished. People are resigned to it. They don't believe in any politician anymore. Everybody is the same. Corruption is like our national disease. Abuse of power is going to stay forever. So nothing is going to change. Look at what happened in Kiev. At that moment when Putin thought that he was on a rampage, that the West had withdrawn, that Europe was weak, that America had other problems, and didn't want to look in our direction, when he had just managed to change elected government through elections, in Ukraine first, then in Georgia, then diverted Armenia from European route, then intercepted Ukraine the last moment, like a hijacker would intercept a plane before landing at the airport. The big Ukrainian plane, 46 million people. And at that moment, the passengers of that plane revolted and basically started to say, to the hell with hijacker, and we will incapacitate him and take the plane where it's going to land. What we saw in Kiev changes the whole equation. And it also shows that ultimate creators of the history are not just great countries, are not just great, big leaders. You mentioned Churchill, or indeed Forbes said that Putin is the world's most powerful man. I think that the reality of that assertion, however questionable it is, but made big impression on Putin himself. But the reality is that the real movers of history in today's epoch are peoples, nations. Those Ukrainians walking in the street, so well organized, so calm, so passionate, so brave, they are not there for their leaders. They are not theirs because I'm sure Vladimir Putin is sitting now and saying, how could I ever not see CIA preparing this plot in Ukraine? There is no way he would ever believe that CIA is not doing that. On the other hand, I'm sure people in CIA are scratching their heads how we missed this thing happening. But the reality is that it's neither CIA or Putin that could anticipate that, because you need to understand politics and mechanics of the process. Peoples are today who are commanding these things and not just separately. And what happens in Ukraine, first thing already happened, and Andrei Piontovsky was right on that. Russians, for the first time, because they're grown on myths that Kiev Rus was mother of Russia. Henry Kissinger said, oh, leave alone Ukraine, they're a soul of Russia. In fact, Ukraine is a separate nation. And Ukraine, as a separate nation, was discovered by Russians en masse last December. They never suspected it existed. Suddenly, they discovered a nation of 46 million people on their doorsteps. That is not, I mean, my good friend Leonid Kuchma wrote a book, Ukraine is not Russia, but nobody really read it. The people saw the title, but they thought, okay, so it's just this weird assertion. In fact, this was proven by people of Ukraine. And the same thing with the Caucasus. Caucasus, no matter how they force us to fight against each other, we are, in a way, one region. We are the people who have lots of common roots, and most importantly, common interests. Now, look how why Soviet Union collapsed. Soviet Union collapsed because it was construed as an empire. Very simple, you know. I grew up in Soviet Union. People say, oh, that wasn't really empire. We know, I mean, we suspected it was, but we didn't know the whole extent of the truth. Until 2009, to call from Azerbaijan to Georgia by like regular phone, the call would go through Novorossiysk and come back to Georgia. The way how cables were put, you are composing number in Baku, it would go through whoever wanted to listen from FSB in Novorossiysk, and then only enter my office in Tbilisi. Pipelines. Every pipeline from Central Asia went through Russia to go to the, and that's still the thing with Turkmenistan. They didn't want to pay them gas price. They blew up pipeline. Somebody did on Russian territory, and so Turkmens were deprived of gas income. Every pipeline was built through Russia. The way how they constructed, there are some people from Central Asian countries here. Hydropower. Switch was in one country, turbines was in another. The water resource was in third. And right now they have their mines, their land mines on the border, and they're put permanently in almost hot war for water resource for switch for turbines. The way how did it in Georgia. We had the two autonomous republics, as we know, and then what we had is that Inguri power plant, which is a huge breakthrough for Georgia, is in the other part of territory of Georgia, but Switch is in Abkhazia. Why did Switch have to be in Abkhazia, for God's sake? Far away from the, somebody was very smart in Moscow, sat down and think, oh, okay, Georgia will one day want to be independent. We have more leverages in Abkhazia, so maybe Switch should be there. Think about it, the way how it built that country, how that country was construed, not to ever allow them to think about independence. Why the economy collapsed immediately in the 90s? Because no factory was independent on their own. You know, they were so badly construed that you had to carry things all the way from Siberia, even if they could have been produced locally. And the whole thing collapsed because it was meant to collapse. Now look how Russia is construed. Exactly the similar way. Russian Federation. They treat their republics as colonies. They treat their people as people who are not supposed, many of them were not supposed to serve in the army, like Georgians. We never had real officers from Georgia. Stalin banned Georgian officers because Georgians fought against Bolsheviks in Poland and Finland and Spain. The idea is that they should bribe local elites, but suppress brutally all the others. If you look at the economic model of the development, they are doing everything not to allow individual so-called ethnic republics to develop on their own. But if you are treating them like colonies, you are not going to keep them or effective control of them. Now, I'm not advocating change of borders. I don't believe it's going to happen or realistic. What I'm saying that it's about whether these people will feel that they are part of that country, or whether they will always be alienated permanently in long run, and in fact, de facto cannot be controlled by central authorities. And exactly for the same reasons how Soviet Union collapsed, there is a big risk of further disintegration of that entity, de facto disintegration, because the way it is construed. And because the way central government is approaching at economic level, at financial level, at policy-making level, at propaganda level, you see things on Russian television. Or there is fight between Chechens and Russians in some Russian city. 3 Chechens killed, 2 Russians killed. If you say on your propaganda these are Chechens and Russians, then you are in trouble, because they are all Russians from your standpoint. Россияне. So, and that's what one thing we changed in Georgia. I said in my first speech when I became president, if you hate Azeris, I'm Azeri for it. Because people were saying, oh, he's Armenian, he's Ossetian. If you hate Ossetian, I'm Ossetian. Okay, Saakashvili is an Ossetian name. If you hate Azeris, if you hate Armenians, I'm Armenian. If you hate Jews, I'm Jewish, because it also sounds Jewish, my name. So I'm everything, but I'll be more Georgian than any of you. Because what I believe is being Georgian is being open to all the ethnic groups living in my country. By the way, that's exactly what Ukrainians are showing now. However much they try to depict them as ultranationalists, Eastern Ukraine is joining the protest because they see that basically the core of this is absolutely open and integrating all the groups. So we are facing big change. And big change, if you look at, because we are talking about Sochi Olympics, if you look historically in the Soviet Union, big change was tied with this kind of events. In 1956, Moscow hosted first youth international festival that was meant to demonstrate superiority of Stalinist system, bring in people from occupied Eastern Europe and Central Europe, show them that there was no other way but the Soviet Union. And there was this big first gathering of basically of students in Eastern Europe to celebrate Stalinist system. What happened? Stalinization started. De-Stalinization started that year. Hungarian Revolution happened that year. Eastern Europe started to crack big time that year. In 1980, Moscow Olympic Games. Again, great victory for Soviet Union. Demonstration of big superiority of the system. Many of the same things. Moscow had to be showcase of the system. Most of the non-Muscovites were not allowed the same way how Northern Caucasians were shut off, most of them from Sochi event. And what happened? Immediately after Olympics, system started to fall apart much faster than anybody could imagine. Well, it coincided with falling oil price, etc. The same thing now, shale gas revolution. Oil is menaced. Oil boom is no longer there. Russia is on the edge of recession. Teetering all the time, 1% growth with $100 oil price, it's very bad. Issues with ethnic republics. Issue of fatigue, because any politician has his own limits, and this is rule of 21st century. You cannot have forever offer your face to the public, either, or your body, naked or flying or diving. So the reality is that we really, if you look at all the things, we are really close to major change. Now, in short run, there are lots of dangers, because people whose fate might be decided by that change, or person whose fate might be decided by that change, Vladimir Putin knows that. He knows it exactly that it's coming. He knows it more than most of the politologists know in this town or even in his own country. And he will do his best to prevent it. The way how he will do it, certainly, is that he knows that he can no longer keep Ukraine, for sure, but he thinks he can keep Crimea. He thinks he can no longer keep Moldova, but he thinks he can have Transnistria. He thinks if he wants to have Transnistria, he needs to have corridor to Transnistria, so he has to go through Ukraine, through Odessa, Nikolaev, and cut through Moldova and connect it with Crimea and with the Tuzla Peninsula to Russia, and through Russia to Abkhazia, which is occupied. He knows all those things. He moved border in Abkhazia without anybody noticing it even. 11 kilometers of annexed territory of a sovereign country in 21st century for Olympic needs. And the Olympic Committee didn't say a word about it. So what we are seeing that here we'll try to do all these things. Now, the good thing is that if you want just somebody sits down carefully and analyze it, it's easy to predict and it's easy to preempt, or it's doable to preempt. We can repeat many times, and this is a motto in this town: Cold War is over, leave us alone. Like Cold War is over, you are entrenched in old mentality. Well, okay, Cold War is over maybe for you, but not for Vladimir Putin. And everything he sees in zero-sum game. Whatever is gained for him is lost for the West, and vice versa. Even if there is no West around in most of these events. You saw how people were taken aback by Ukrainian events in the West. People didn't expect it to happen. People were saying all the time, okay, things are happening in Kiev, Ukraine will split into West. It's not happening. This is not the way it will happen. Simply just they didn't know it. Those who know, us who know Ukraine was telling them there is no East and West Ukraine. There is one Ukraine. There is just chance for the Russians because the only place in Crimea where their Russians are predominant in ethnic majority is Crimea. That's the only reason. But there is Eastern Ukrainians and simply not Russians. Forget about it. And so we need to get prepared, to get ready. And I'm sure in the end there will be a good outcome. I think the time of empires is over. Empire in our part of the world is not sustainable. People are not willing to live with this thing. People are getting better off. I know in 2008, and I want to finish with that, there was, Putin tried to use again, like he did in the 90s, Russia did in the 90s, Northern Caucasians to fight against Georgia and South Ossetia. So he brought in Chechen groups, and basically Chechens refused to fight, most of them. And that, by the way, Putin said it later in the interview, we trained all these, so-called volunteers, and it was not really enough for anything. True, they refused to fight. But it wasn't always the case. In 19th century, Georgians fought against other Caucasian people, Georgian officers, because before that, other empires used Northern Caucasians to do things against Georgians. I live in Quareli, and I know that people from other side of the ridge were coming in 18th century, held by other empires, not Russia at that moment, to loot Georgia. So Georgia has had this grudge. So in the 19th century, they already were used by Russians to take their own revenge on North Caucasians. Then in 20th century, Russia needed them, and they were used in Abkhazia. And now, again, so there is this never-ending cycle of revenge and reprisals. Well, we should end if we want future for our nations. I mean, Ibrahim Yaganov is here, who was one of the main commanders against Georgian troops in Abkhazia in the 90s. And I think and the fact that he says now that if you have to choose between Russia and Georgia, the choice is quite simple. I think it's very indicative. We all are learning. We all have experience. We all made our moves, and we all have our own second thoughts about those moves. And that's the way to take for those nations. We are too small, one by one. We are too divided, and when we are divided, we are too easy to conquer and annihilate, like Cherkessians were annihilated, like Georgians were annihilated from Abkhazia. Well, it's time to end this cycle and see that in 21st century, those things are decided otherwise. And especially because empire is trying to impose old thinking, and we need new thinking in order to defeat this empire for good. Thank you again, and I'm open for your questions.
Right here in the front row, and please identify yourself. And also, when you get a chance, we had a question from Twitter. Someone was asking you, what do you think is going to be the future of the Circassians after the Sochi Olympics? So you can work that right here, Matt. You can work that into your remarks. No. Yeah, right. Sure, go ahead.
Hello, my name's Alex Van Os. I teach at the Foreign Service Institute.
Is the mic on?
Is the mic on?
Yeah,
yes.
Okay. All right.
Alex Van Os. I teach at the Foreign Service Institute. My students go to Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan professionally. Sooner or later, the cameras go away. They go away from Sochi, they go away from this room. I'd like to hear from you, what are the quiet, slow things that can be done between the United States, Georgia, and the Caucasus, out of the range of cameras?
Well, first of all, it's a daily issue to keep Georgian state as the first modern state that emerged in the Caucasus alive. It's education, education, and education. I think education is the key for everything. You know that we had the agreement with Millennium Challenge Corporation to open technology university in Batumi, American Technology University. There was a consortium of very good American universities coming in. We, Georgian government, already spent more than $40 million to make this tallest building in the Caucasus happen, and the beautiful, nice building. We opened most of it. And Americans, and I discussed it many times with Hillary Clinton and President Obama, basically went along with the progress. And I wanted this university to be this center for the region, for highest quality education, first ever genuine American campus in post-Soviet sphere. And things were already through, and everything was ready, except that when there was change of government through elections, and the government somehow decided to shut down this university, Americans didn't object to it. They said, okay, it was our plans, we agreed preliminarily, but okay, you don't want, now, okay. They shouldn't have said, okay. They should have said, let's stick to contract. Because these kind of centers create these centers of excellence, which creates new standards for all of us. And I think if we got the biggest hit in the last couple of years, everything else can be brought back, but that university is gone forever because it will take another 10 years for us to restart it. And not forever, but a long time. And we don't have those 10 years. And so that kind of things, when you create, and we created a center where we would bring in people from Northern Caucasus, because education also brings, uneducated people, it's easy to sell all kind of rubbish. It's easy to sell an uneducated person in Georgia rubbish that all North Caucasians are our enemies, and to tell them, don't you remember last image you have that they were playing with cut heads of Georgians in the Gagra Stadium in '92? That's the last thing that Georgians, if you don't have proper education, have heard of Northern Caucasians. Or it's for Northern Caucasus, it's easy to sell that Georgia, as these young officials I met in an Anaklia hotel not far from Cherkessian Genocide Museum, they were telling me, until we came with our own eyes, we are convinced that Georgia is a very dangerous rural areas where they kill all the time, and which is extremely backward. And it's like high-tech place. And they say, we don't see, but it's easy to sell people who don't have a background or information, all kind of rubbish. And it's uninformed people are easy to control. But the good news is that Facebook is changing this very fast, because with Facebook, I mean, we really get much better understanding of the complexities of the world, and that's the big change, because small countries might yield considerably big soft power. Georgia would never have been player 20, 30 years ago. What really turned Georgia into a player was new technologies. People start to learn about these reforms, change, and people, I would go to Kyrgyzstan and students would know everything about Georgia reforms. The same thing in the Ukraine, when I spoke to Maidan, how like hundreds of thousands of people, they applauded me because they knew everything about Georgian reforms. And these new technologies give smaller countries much bigger power. They give smaller peoples much bigger say. There is no place that can be totally forgotten anymore. There is no place where you can do just anything anymore, and nobody will learn about it, at least for some time. Things happen instantly. There's some people I see with iPhones now. It can be live somewhere else. So that's the new reality, and I think but also it needs to be backed up by education, by deeper thing than just iPhone, just telephones. And education can be done. It's doable. We set examples for that.
Okay, we'll go here. And then we'll go to, is anyone in the back of the room after this wants to ask a question? Okay. All right, we'll wait.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your really interesting speech. I'm Tiona Lavrelashvili, founder of the Youth Parliament, and I would like to use this opportunity and express my gratitude towards Mikheil Saakashvili for supporting young people in Georgia, for investing and encouraging them for education and for more political participation. Regarding the question, one of the major problems Georgia is facing, of course, is occupation, which is creeping occupation. In Russia, it's moving and extending its borders day by day. And after the Sochi Olympics, what do you think, Mr. President? What can be the concrete, like short-term or long-term solution to the conflict resolution? Thank you very much.
Well, I think every solution goes through transformed Russia still. And there are no quick fixes unless Russia really gets transformed, but we need to be prepared for it. Russia is going to be transformed. It's already being transformed by Ukraine, by many other events, by shale gas revolution, by fatigue inside Russia. And it's like getting to the surface. And once it gets to the surface, we should not miss our chance. That's why it's so important to reach out to different ethnic groups, to talk, to prepare plans. The problem is that the way how Russians want it now, it's not by accident that there is intensification of so-called bilateral talks between Russians and some level of Georgian officials saying, okay, we're talking, leave us alone. We can sort things out between each other. And, by the way, there are lots of people in the West who say, okay, this Saakashvili, was bugging us all the time. He's an unpleasant, annoying person because he's all the time reminding us about his small, insignificant country. We need nicer people there who will say Georgia doesn't matter, who will just go and sort out their issues with Russia. After all, Russian poets love Georgia and they like Georgia food. There are plenty of cynical people like that who would say that. And anything that would come and say, talk about occupation, talk about illegalities, they say, again, these aggressive, impetuous Georgian nationalists coming to town. But the reality, it's not if even I shut up or whatever, succumb into oblivion, or many other people like me who would say that, the reality is not going to go away, and the reality bites. That's how it is. And so from that standpoint, you cannot say, they are talking with each other. It's not going to produce any results. What is really going to produce results is transparency, international community being there, principles applied. And when principles are applied, then Russia should also be, of course, big part of not only problem, but of solution. But only as a result of big international effort. By itself, just one-to-one, Russia will always be a problem, big problem. Because it has this instinct that if you are there alone, unprotected, without, if you move away from a lit-up street to dark corner of the off-road, somewhere into the mud, you are very easy to annihilate. If you are moving on well-lit road, especially if there are police driving there, or indeed at least street cameras so that people at least later will learn what's happened to you, it's much harder for any instinctive robber or, purple person who wants to do violence against you to do things. That's why we need to sort out all our things in very well-lit places in presence of the others. There is no dark corner solution for all of us. We've already tried it many times, and it always failed.
Question in the back. Please identify.
President, you are known for a very bold approach to complicated issues, sometimes turning around political issues for 180%. And the way you introduced Ibrahim Yaganov, former Abkhaz volunteer who fought against Georgians, shows that you can look at the political issues from completely unexpected and different angles. And here there was this comparison to Churchill, and I won't put you in awkward situation and won't ask you if you're coming back to Premier Minister position like Churchill did. But if you would come, would you have a different approach to resolution of problem of the integrity of territorial integrity of Georgia, and would you consider possibility of recognition of Abkhazia, for example, or you still have the same approach that you had when you were president of the country? Thank you.
No, absolutely not. I strongly believe in, look, you want me to give up my house? My house is in Eshera, Sukhumi. My house, my family house. My grandfather was born there. My great-grandparents lived there. But from my mother's side, I'm Migrelian, and it's Megrel's house. It's also Abkhaz house. And they live next to each other, and I don't believe in ethnic exceptionalism, which means that I don't believe that one ethnic group can, under any circumstances, take prevalence over the other groups. And this thing was used. Georgians were used, ethnic Georgians against ethnic Abkhaz, and ethnic Abkhaz were used against ethnic Georgians. We know that. And that was the nationalistic approach, was the main trump card which Soviet system was playing. And when we are talking about Soviet Union, when we are talking that the last stage of dissolution of Soviet Union happened not in 92, but it's happening now. We are saying that Soviet mentality is being broken now. And one of the main vestiges of Soviet mentality was the idea of ethnic superiority. In other words, if you were Georgian in Tbilisi, you are free to discriminate Abkhaz as much as you wanted. If you are Abkhaz in Abkhazia, you are encouraged to discriminate Georgians because that's how it worked. And lots of people felt, okay, I'm suppressed by the system, but at least I am free to discriminate my fellow countrymen because I'm Georgian or because I'm Abkhaz. Well, this is not the way to take. The idea of nation state gets transformed, and the way how we see it is not what the idea gets transformed, but not the way how what you are saying. Like by that, this kind of cutting this thing does not involve solutions. What we need, that Northern Caucasus also needs. I don't believe in change of borders, but I believe in change of perceptions, in change of approaches. I don't believe that we should change borders with Russian Federation. We have an amazingly nice border of Caucasian Reach, which Russia violated and spilled over, but it will spill back because this is not sustainable. But once there is no change of border, there should be change of attitudes. That border should become transparent. They should not discriminate peoples. They should allow we introduced visa-free travel on my initiative for the Russian citizens. You know why? People were saying, we are letting in our enemies. Yeah, Putin's regime is Georgia's enemy. So what? I don't believe Russians are our enemies. I don't believe, and even if they had been en masse thinking that they are our enemies, it's better to bring those people inside and to see with their own eyes, not through the eyes of ORT and TV, how Georgia looks. Because for me, it was the primarily security issue. People say, we're saying it's a security issue, we cannot let them in. Precisely because it's a security issue, we had to let them in. We wanted them to see it for any future adventure to be much more complicated and much less possible for Putin to mobilize public opinion against this big enemy, Georgia. So that's what I believe in. I believe in that, people are entitled to their homes. We are entitled, like Cherkezians are entitled to their houses in Sochi. I'm entitled to my grandfather's house in Eshera. As well as Abkhaz, it's their house. There is no other home they have. And I believe in strong decentralization. We gave all the budgetary powers to the region of Adjara. Look at Adjara and look at Abkhazia. Abkhazia is half in ruins. I was talking to Ibrahim yesterday, and he was telling about that. I know this story from all the accounts. Adjara, if we had not wrestled it out from the hands of Putin in 2004, now Adjara would have been recognized by Russia and being a separate country, and maybe by Nauru and Tuvalu. That's how I see it. And that doesn't mean that we should in any way exclude the idea of people being free, but you need about free peoples, free societies, free individuals, free ethnic groups, and that's when they thrive, they realize their own selves through different means. That's how I see it. I don't believe that, and the point is that when you are talking, when they were again asking me, and I think Mr. Yaganov knows it, and we all know it, when we are talking, okay, Georgia, as you said, shall it give independence to Abkhazia? And what will happen to Abkhazia? It will become Russian. That's the reality of today, right? So that's not the, from my standpoint, best outcome for that ethnic group, which I wish lots of success. Last summer, I spent lots of time in street cafes of Batumi, and lots of ethnic Abkhaz from Sukhumi, I would say, lots, 25, 30 people, one by one, was coming during several weeks when I was having holidays to shake hands and take photos. First time they crossed this barbed wire and line, and they moved in to see how other autonomous republic looks. By the way, Batumi has more ethnic Abkhaz today than Sukhumi. And they were fascinated. The way we were developing the port of Lazika, exactly on the administrative and the occupation line, was the fact that in this was city, there is this beautiful five-star hotel that some local inhabitants built. Some members of personnel as well as manager of the hotel come from Sukhumi. They are Abkhaz from Sukhumi. They send another story back. So we do all those things, and then we discuss all kind of other issues, rather than starting with just giving them, throwing them away to the Russians and say, okay, do with them whatever you want. I think the last thing I will wish our Abkhaz brothers and sisters to have.
Question here.
Thanks, Matt. Gamar Jobat, President Saakashvili. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in 2003 and 2004. I lived in Lagodaki. My name is Patricia. I'm currently writing a master's thesis on NGOs in Georgia, and my question is, do you know what new initiatives NGOs are taking in the Caucasus for 2014? Didi Madlova.
What kind of initiative?
That NGOs are taking? Anything new that NGOs are doing?
Well, I'm out of government, so I was like, you are especially interested in NGOs where you are in government, you know, because they are kind of, NGO sounds dubious already in government, right? Instinctively, kind of. But yeah, I think there are, when we're talking about Peace Corps, one of the great things we did, I generalized the Peace Corps program, and we did this thing with American teachers coming all over Georgia. We got by now already 6,000 of them learn and teach with Georgians. And we did another program, ethnic Georgian volunteers, or whatever, whoever was good Georgian speaker, to go to ethnic minority areas and teach Georgian to them. So we would go to, say, ethnically predominantly Azeri or Armenian area or Ossetian area and teach them English and Georgian at the same time. And it worked, and it works brilliantly. And that's what really, and it really brings, when we are talking about such groups as Peace Corps, but especially in a large program like Peace Corps, you not only bring education to those places, you bring culture, you bring approaches, unique civil vision of the world, you bring tolerance and openness, open society. So, so what we need to do is, again, when we are talking about, asked about the question, you know, or the previous question, we don't need to change borders, but we need to open up our societies. And that can only be done by civil society. That can never, government can only facilitate things, but open societies take care of a lot of issues. And that's how that I would encourage, there are many people from NGOs to dare and go and do things, and then I think eventually things might go to move in the right direction. Whenever you think that, oh, it's useless and it's not moving, at a certain moment you'll see things start to really go very fast.
Let's go to this side of the room, and then we'll come back to you, so just be patient.
Iyad Ugar with the International Circassian Council. Mr. President, I just want to say a few things that, and I'm going to be greedy and ask two questions. Both of them are very important. But first, I wanted to tell you that looking at your leadership from the times of the Rose Revolution until the time of erecting the monument, the Circassian genocide monument in Anaklia, I think myself and many Circassians, I truly believe that your leadership will go down in history as one courageous and brave Caucasian leadership that had a vision and fulfilled that vision while you were in office. And we all appreciate this, and many, many Circassians really and truly appreciate what you have done. And you showed us that the Caucasus connection, establishing a strong relation among Caucasian, is essential, not because only of the future interest of all nations in the Caucasus, but also because of the similarities and the background that attach all of us together in the Caucasus in a way, in a common history. I was in Warsaw at one time when you said that, and this was a couple of months after the parliament election, and you said, I guess in a way that we asked a question about what to expect from the current parliament elected, and he said something to the extent that in order for leadership to take a foothold in a country, two opposing sides would have to come and go unelected by the people. And that gave me an idea of your thoughts on this. Now, having said this, what do we as Circassians and Georgians who supported you all the time and will support any leadership of that type in the Caucasus, what do we to expect in the near future as we've seen two opposing government came in a democratic way, hopefully, and what should we expect as Circassians and Georgians in the near future from this? The second and most important.
Can we just limit to one question, please?
Okay, thanks.
Well, just short one, man.
Yeah, it is a short one. In view of the relations between Circassian and Georgians in Georgia, there are a lot of things that were done, and were done in a very good way, and we all appreciated that. But also, Circassians and Georgian who worked together in Georgia at the time, we do realize that there are many, many things that we could have done more. What do you think, how should we build the future of relations, and what type of projects should both Circassians and Georgians have together in order to address the future of those of both people?
Well, you know, my favorite Caucasian leader is going to revisit issues is Baysangur. And Baysangur, I mean, he was a very valiant commander. For those of you who don't know, he was the last one to resist Russian invaders in the Caucasus. Actually,
What was his name again?
Baysangur.
Baysangur.
Yeah, and actually when Imam Shamil surrendered, and he was going, Baysangur told him, don't turn your back to me because I will shoot you. I cannot shoot you in the back, but if you face me, I will have to shoot you because you don't have to surrender. But Baysangur finally was captured with the Russians sometime after Imam Shamil's final surrender. And so he was wounded, he was captured, and they brought him to hang him. And they brought the whole people from different villages in Dagestan, and all of them had to pull the chair out. And the idea of Russians was very cunning. So if you take all these different ethnic groups killing Baysangur together, then the revenge will be forever. And it will be internecine Caucasian revenge against each other. And Baysangur, when he saw this, he somehow managed to slide out of the hands of the captors and pulled off the chair himself, and he hanged his own self, saying that no more Caucasian revenge. And that's when you are talking, you asked about Ibrahim Yaganov. That's the same story. That's continuation of Baysangur's story. Do we have again go on cycles again and again and again, or we do something else? And when we talk about Circassians, that was the idea. I mean, the idea is that Circassians suffered so much, amazingly talented people. The fact that they're talented was proven because they ruled big empires after that, or before that as well, together, by the way, with Georgians, if you look at the history of Middle East. Amazingly talented in the nation historically and talented now. And that was one of the reasons, by the way, why we were annihilated from that place. Exactly like the way Georgians were annihilated from Abkhazia. The most talented Georgians came from Georgians from Abkhazia. And you can see it, they're all around the world and they're very successful. Some of them, I guess, are here as well. So what I'm saying is that what we need to do now, that no elected government in Georgia, democratically elected government, can ignore those issues. Rhetoric might change, alter, but many of the things they've said they would do, they didn't because they confront the reality. That's what happens with every democratic process. You want to do everything opposite to the predecessor, but you come in and then say, okay, maybe after all we try. It's better not to try the same mistakes. The good thing is that you learn fast from the mistakes because we made mistakes as an elected government. The next one will make it. The other elected government after that will make mistakes. But let's learn from the previous ones, or make this cycle of learning very fast. So I think we are really approaching the period of great turmoil because of the reasons I spoke about in my speech. Now, it's up to Caucasian people whether they use this, in this turmoil, they can again be braced against each other, manipulate against each other, or we, this time, learn from our past history and hold hands in order to survive together. Because there will be big change coming. And once this change happens, it should be changed to the better for us, but the only way we can turn into better change is if we understand that we have common interests. And when we talk about new initiatives with Cherkessian, I think education should be enhanced. I think human contact should be enhanced. That's the absolute key. I think we should have mass public education program also inside Georgia about the Caucasian issues. We lack that. Our history, I mean, we had to work much more on our more fair and more kind of balanced view of history rather than what they were teaching us. Because the point here is that we need to understand that like for instance, Baisangur, I know very few Georgians that know his name. For obvious reasons, because Russian Empire didn't want his name to be remembered. Shamil was a great commander. They wanted him to be remembered because that great commander finally surrendered. Baisangur never did. That's the way how history is being manipulated. You don't need any Caucasian leader that never surrendered. What we managed to do in 2008, we saved Georgian statehood. Tell me, when last time did Soviet Union invade anybody and the country didn't fall totally? And it was Soviet army, I mean, the full 150,000 troops, 200 planes bombing us, 3,000 armored tanks and vehicles. As big the army as invaded Afghanistan. As big the army that invaded Hungary. As big the army that invaded Czechoslovakia. When was the last time when a small country like Georgia was invaded in the fall? Finland, 1939. Since 1935, no country survived. And what Russians want to be remembered from that war? Saakashvili eating his tie. Not the fact that Georgia survived. That's the way how the history is being manipulated, even the recent one. And why, when I talk about education, it's very easy to force the people who are uneducated to forget their own recent past. Because educate ones remember their past, and educate ones learn from their mistakes. Those who lack education, especially also knowledge of history, don't learn anything from their own mistakes, even recent ones, and don't remember their recent past. That's why the Orwellian world. You are at war with East Asia, but next day you are at war with Eurasia and forgot the East Asia story. You're not supposed to remember. While the way how empire approaches us is very clear. They have very clear patterns, and if you look back to the time when they were taking Kazan, in many of the ways, the same thing is applied today to Northern Caucasus or to Caucasus in general. They have good memory. Sometimes genetic, instinctive, whatever, but they have memory. We also have to have memory. That's why this Cherkessian genocide was so important. Recognition was important because it's not about vindictiveness. It's about memory, not to get it repeated again. Maybe if we had spoken more about Cherkessian genocide earlier, there would not have been an ethnic cleansing in Abkhazia, or indeed in 2008 in Tskhin Valley. Maybe we could have avoided much worse things. It's not just kind of thing, okay, we want to be victims. No, we just want to avoid new victims. We want to avoid no new tragedies in our part of the world. That's why it's not that we wanted to please somebody or make a gesture. I believe that knowing history of your region, of your proximity, of parallel civilization cultures, very close ones to us, makes us stronger, makes us better for the future, makes us safer for the future. So let's do it at least now, and let's learn it about each other much more.
Right here in the back.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Gerard Toll. I'm a professor of political geography at Virginia Tech University in the National Capital Region. And I'm struggling with a book on the August 2008 war. You talked about, and this is a very important part of your legacy, obviously, you talked about second thoughts, learning from your mistakes, and beyond the obvious geopolitical explanation that we all know about that war, there is the background, the 2004 effort which led to fighting, and then the Saakashvili project in 2007. So I wanted to ask you if you could reflect a little bit on your thinking about those moves that Georgia made at that time and what you would do differently, or how you would describe that to us so we can understand more fully that particular very important moment.
Well, you mentioned Sanacor project. This was a project which I strongly believe in, because it wasn't Sanacor project, it's a project of soft power, enabling ethnic Ossetians that you belong in Georgia. And Sanacor was a person who fought against Georgia with arms in his hands, exactly like our friend here. In 2004, Sanacor was commanding the troops that killed, local militias that killed our soldiers, 16 soldiers during 1 week, in one by one, and it was like very nervous moment for us. But the thing happened not because we moved, as some people say, but because we moved to shut down the black hole of smuggling, without which we couldn't fix Georgian economy. And then they moved because they were benefiting from the smuggling, and we had to move in to do that. So it's not like everything had its own origins. Now, in 2008, I think there is a very good op-ed in Wall Street Journal by Matt Breiser, who was first-hand witness of those events. And Matt Breiser said, and think, oh, who moved first and who shot first? And I mean, first of all, Russian troops were first, and I mean, every time, and this is people who just want to see it. Every time big country attacked the small one, have you ever heard that big country said that they were not attacked first? The problem is that when are the useful idiots in the West who would believe it, the story? Don't you know that Finland attacked mighty Soviet Union? 4 million strong Finnish army. Basically, they were so stupid as to, attack radio station of, basically border guard outposts of Soviets. And what else had 300 million people strong Soviet Union had to do? They had to respond to these Finnish aggressors. There were rallies all around Petersburg. Down with Finnish aggressors. Let's go and beat out shit out of Mannerheim. Aggressive Finnish imperialist that wants to conquer proletarian capital. Don't you know that Poland started Second World War? Yeah, of course. Poland did it. Polish aggressive imperialists had long-time big designs against Germany and the USSR. They hated those two truly people states, so they attacked radio station in German territory. What else had poor Germans to do? I mean, by accident, they were exercising next to Polish borders. By accident, 200,000 strong army was exercising close to Georgian borders. By accident, Black Sea Fleet left Sebastopol for Georgian stores on 5th of August, by accident. By accident, there were mobilization of all the pilots to bomb Georgia, including pensioners from Moscow streets. And then, by accident, stupid, crazy Saakashvili launched the war, and then what else was to Russia? But in order to use already mobilized Black Sea Fleet, already mobilized pilots from Moscow streets, already to mobilize 200,000 troops. And not by accident, some stupid idiots in the West totally bought this story. Because they didn't want to know anything. That's the reality of what happened in 2008. And so the reality, and when Matt writes about it, he says, Georgia was put in lose-lose situation. What's left? It's like you are in tunnel already, and there is no way back. You go in faster or slower. You are in a tunnel. What I regret, we shouldn't have been put into a tunnel, but how I did my part of convincing as much as I could. I toured these capitals many times. There are recorded conversations. I warned about exact scenarios, how it was going to happen. Not only I warned, Putin was telling them exactly the same. Putin was telling them, yes, I will fight the war. That's how it was. Putin was telling them the dates of the war. Some Western leaders and policymakers were told 9th of August beforehand. 9th of August. Well, it was 2 days earlier. So that's the only thing I can tell you. Look at history. I'm sorry. And there are many other examples, and there are patterns of behavior of, especially of Russian power. I mean, Finland was Russia. Many other places was Russia, Soviet Union, Afghanistan, Russia. Of course, Afghans provoked the Russians. Russia didn't want to go in, but what else was left? You know, there was a humanitarian disaster happening, right? In 1921, Georgians provoked the Russians. First, they started to kill all the ethnic proletarian Armenians and Azeris inside Georgian territory, according to Russian version. Then they attacked Russian border guards that were already on the border with Azerbaijan. Poor Russians had to react to this aggressive Georgians. So Georgia lost independence for 70-something years. That's how things do happen in our part of the world.
Here in the front.
Rafiq Gurbanzadeh, Edmund Muskie Fellow.
Sorry.
Rafiq Gurbanzadeh, Edmund Muskie Fellow. So, Mr. Saakashvili, my question is hypothetical by nature. Imagine you're president again, and Russia is at the brink of demise. Will you use a military force again? And imagine that also
to like hasten up the demise of Russia, or how?
No, against the separatist regimes. If you decide not, what would restrain you from using this military measures?
No, I'm not wishing Russia demise, but I can tell you, the very moment Russia leaves Caucasus, which it unavoidably will, both north and south part as by military force. I'm not talking about leaving them in terms of state, but Russian military, remember my word, will have to leave North and South Caucasus, both. The very moment it happens, there will be no temptation even for the most aggressive elements, whoever might be in Georgian government there, to even contemplate anything close to military action. For very obvious reasons. All these people will have, once there is the main factor is gone, then there will be other factors in interplay which will enable us to solve many issues peacefully and in a cooperative manner. That's why we need to prepare for that moment. And this moment is not as far as away as we think. We need to get ready. We need to have all kind of schema, all kind of models, all kind of... you mentioned Sanakoy. We took Ossetians to see Åland Islands in Finland, because when I was working for the Norwegian Institute of Human Rights in Oslo, I worked a lot on different autonomy models, and we wanted them to see we need these things should be brought back and again seen and again discussed, because there will be lots of opportunities and openings coming. I have no illusions that until they are there, we can have a breakthrough. We can continue talking and not notice elephant in the room, yeah? Elephant is just playing around, but we are like small people and we can talk with each other, except that the elephant comes and kicks somebody from time to time with its beak, whatever. But the reality is that, you know, once elephant is out, back to the zoo or to the wilderness, then things might move. Then again, we will regain this kind of autonomy to act. And once you have the autonomy to act, there will be much less room for provocations. That's what we need to prepare for. Because, you know, when we are talking about 90s, again, it was empire being crashed. And it was really, there were lots of local elements contributing to violence. It's obvious, we know that. But without Russia, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, even then, it's so clear. Like Yugoslavia would not have happened without Serb Yugoslav National Army. True. Whatever it's, I have big sympathy for Serb people, but Yugoslav National Army was there as a factor. Nothing would have happened without their control. And all the other things, militias and things emerged later. And once, because Georgia already has modern state. Modern states don't decide these things through violent means. That's why we should be remembered. That's why we needed a state. To do many things peacefully. By the way, that's why Russia needed invasion in 2008, because they could no longer sort out things through militias and local uncontrolled elements. They were no longer had decisive say in Georgia. They had very weak positions. They couldn't have provoked things. In 2004, we didn't have state, so Sanakoyev's group could stir up trouble in South Ossetia. In 2008, already in 4 years' time, there was no group that on its own could stir up anything major. That's why they needed to come with the army. But that was, by the way, if you look historically at Russia, every time they came with the army, it was a moment of weakness, not strength. Because Russians, by the way, with all the things, my criticism of their aggressiveness, use army as a last resort historically. They always do internal subversion, changing of governments, what it means, well, in modern epoch through elections, weakening countries from inside. You know, when they took Kazan, I refer to Kazan, they didn't have to use military force. This great Orda became totally useless because Russian marionettes, one after another, just basically took over, and they weakened the place so much internally that they didn't have to shed any blood. They just moved in and took it, and had a strategic breakthrough. Russia didn't have to take Georgia with force in the 19th century. They did it through all kinds of things, diplomatic maneuvers, forcing other empires to invade Georgia, and basically bribing and corrupting local elites. They didn't fight, really. We had lots of uprisings later, but they didn't really fight. Georgia by 1921 was so weak already internally. There were so many Bolshevik elements penetrating all kinds of parts, so it was easy to take, easy prey over. The same happened to Azerbaijan and Armenia. Using armies usually the last resort. The fact that they had to use it in 2008 didn't show they were strong, especially because they couldn't accomplish their thing. But it showed that they had no other things left. That's what happens when you have something else on the other side, a real state that functions. And it was an amazing picture during the war was a contrast between this brutal force and the well-functioning Georgian institutions, Georgian police force, Georgian emergency services, electricity services, power lines, cell phones, how they functioned, how local bureaucrats functioned, the contrast between this brutal, unorganized, massive force and what we already had on the ground as a state. I think it made a huge impression on the Russians that came. Thank you.
Thank you for the stay. We'll join for lunch here and regroup in about 15 minutes.